Get your black ass out of my booth before I drag you out myself. Officer Bradley Hutchinson towers over the corner booth at Miller's Family Diner, his meaty hand gripping his nightstick. Below him, a black father instinctively shields his two young children while his wife clutches her purse with trembling fingers. The entire restaurant freezes. "Please, officer, we're just having lunch with our kids," the father says quietly, his voice steady despite the danger. Hutchinson's lips curl into a cruel smile. "I don't care if you're having your last meal." He raises his nightstick high above the family's table, then brings it crashing down. Plates shatter into jagged pieces. Hot soup explodes across the father's white shirt. Broken glass rains down on the children's homework. "Daddy!" the 8-year-old boy cries out, food dripping from his hair. "That's what happens when you don't listen," Hutchinson sneers. Have you ever witnessed pure evil hiding behind a badge of authority? 30 minutes earlier, the Richardson family had pulled into Miller's Diner parking lot after a 3-hour drive through winding country roads. Commander James Richardson stepped out of their black SUV, stretching his back after the long journey from visiting his mother-in-law in the next state over. At 42, James moved with the quiet confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. His khaki pants were perfectly pressed, his navy polo shirt spotless despite the road trip. A simple gold wedding band caught the afternoon sunlight as he opened the rear door for his children. "Can we get pancakes, Daddy?" 8-year-old Tyler bounded out of the car, his backpack covered in patches of military aircraft and ships. His latest drawing, a detailed sketch of a Navy destroyer, poked out from his folder. "It's 3 in the afternoon, baby," laughed Sarah Richardson, smoothing down her floral dress as she emerged from the passenger seat. At 38, she carried herself with the patient grace of an elementary school teacher who'd spent 15 years managing classrooms full of energetic children. 12-year-old Maya rolled her eyes at her little brother. "Tyler, they don't serve breakfast all day everywhere." She clutched her honor roll certificate from last semester, planning to show her grandmother when they returned home. The family walked across the gravel parking lot toward Miller's Diner, a classic roadside establishment that looked frozen in 1955. Red and white checkered curtains framed windows that needed washing. A hand-painted sign promised home cooking since 1962 in faded blue letters. Inside, the diner buzzed with typical Sunday afternoon energy. Elderly couples shared slices of apple pie. A group of teenagers occupied the corner booth, arguing over who would pay for the shared basket of onion rings. Truckers sat at the counter, trading stories over endless cups of coffee. The Richardson family slid into booth 7 near the window. Tyler immediately began coloring on his paper placemat, while Maya pulled out her summer reading book. Sarah studied the laminated menu, noting the prices were surprisingly reasonable for a family restaurant. James scanned the room with trained eyes, a habit from 20 years of military service that he couldn't quite shake even during family outings. Most of the other customers were white, but that wasn't unusual in small towns throughout this part of the state. He noticed a few curious glances, but nothing that set off any internal alarms. The waitress, a tired-looking woman in her 50s named Betty, approached with a coffee pot. "Y'all from around here?" she asked, automatically filling James's cup. "Just passing through on our way home," Sarah replied with her warmest teacher smile. "We heard you have excellent pie." Betty's weathered face brightened. "Cherries fresh today. Made it myself this morning." She ruffled Tyler's hair affectionately. "What about you, young man? You look like a hamburger kind of kid." Tyler giggled and pointed to the pictures on the children's menu. Maya ordered a grilled cheese sandwich, carefully pronouncing each word with the same precision she used during her school presentations. James felt himself relaxing for the first time all weekend. The visit with Sarah's mother had been tense. The older woman still wasn't entirely comfortable with her daughter's marriage to a military man who was away for months at a time. But here, watching his children laugh and argue over whether to order chocolate or vanilla milkshakes, everything felt normal. Through the window, James could see their SUV in the parking lot. In the back, Hidden beneath soccer equipment and overnight bags, lay his military duffel bag containing dress uniforms and ceremonial items he'd need for an upcoming Navy event. His SEAL team identification and commander's badge were tucked safely in his wallet, items he rarely needed during family trips like this one. The afternoon sun streamed through the diner's windows, casting everything in golden light. The sounds of ordinary American life filled the air, the sizzle of bacon on the grill, the gentle hum of conversation, the soft clink of silverware against plates. Tyler had finished his drawing and was showing it proudly to his sister. "Look, Maya, it's Daddy's ship!" The 8-year-old had drawn a detailed warship complete with tiny figures on the deck. "That's really good, Tyler," Maya said, her big sister's voice mixing pride with gentle correction. "But Daddy works on smaller boats, remember?" James smiled at his children's chatter, grateful for these quiet moments between deployments. In a few weeks, he'd be back to leading SEAL Team 7 through dangerous missions in hostile territories. But right now, he was just a father buying his kids lunch at a roadside diner. None of them noticed the patrol car pulling into the parking lot outside. The bell above Miller's diner door chimed at exactly 2:52 p.m. as Officer Bradley Hutchinson stepped inside. His heavy boots struck the linoleum floor with deliberate force, announcing his presence to every customer in the restaurant. At 45 years old, Hutchinson carried himself like a man who'd spent his entire adult life intimidating others. His uniform stretched tight across his barrel chest, the fabric straining at the buttons. 15 years of wielding authority had carved permanent lines of cruelty around his pale blue eyes. He paused just inside the doorway, letting his gaze sweep across the diner's interior like a predator surveying its territory. When his eyes landed on Booth 7, his entire demeanor shifted. The Richardson family sat peacefully by the window, completely unaware they had just become his target. Hutchinson's jaw tightened as he watched James help Tyler cut his hamburger into smaller pieces. The sight of this happy black family in what he considered his domain triggered something ugly deep in his chest. "Afternoon, Officer Hutchinson," Betty called from behind the counter, her voice carrying a note of wariness. She'd worked at Miller's long enough to recognize the dangerous glint in his eyes. He ignored her greeting, walking slowly past the Richardson family's booth. Once, twice, 3 times. Each pass brought him closer to their table, his hand resting casually on his service weapon. On his 4th pass, Hutchinson stopped directly beside their booth. He unclipped his radio, turning up the volume deliberately loud. Static filled the air as he pressed the talk button. "Unit 47 to dispatch," he spoke into the radio, his voice carrying clearly across the now quiet restaurant. "Yeah, we got some visitors at Miller's today. Gonna keep an eye on the situation." The radio crackled with the dispatcher's confused response. "Unit 47, do you need backup?" "Not yet," Hutchinson replied, staring directly at James as he spoke. "But you never know with these types." James felt his wife's hand find his under the table, her fingers squeezing gently. He recognized the signs, the deliberate intimidation, the coded language, the way other customers had suddenly stopped talking to watch the show. Maya looked up from her book, confusion clouding her young face. "Daddy, what does he mean?" Before James could answer, Hutchinson leaned down toward their table. The smell of stale coffee and cheap cologne wafted from his uniform as he placed both hands flat on their table, his knuckles white with pressure. "Folks have been calling in reports about suspicious activity," he said, his voice loud enough for the entire diner to hear. "Someone matching your description was seen casing businesses in town. You mind telling me what you're really doing here?" The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Every eye in the restaurant focused on the Richardson family. James felt the familiar weight of judgment settling on his shoulders, the same feeling he'd carried since childhood, the exhausting burden of having to prove his innocence simply for existing while black. "Officer, we're just having lunch," James replied calmly, years of military discipline keeping his voice level. "We're driving home from visiting family." Hutchinson's lips curled into a cold smile. Is that right? And where exactly is home? Sarah cleared her throat nervously. San Diego. My husband is stationed at Naval Base Coronado. Military, huh? Hutchinson's voice dripped with mock respect. Well, that still doesn't explain what you were doing at the hardware store this morning, or the bank, or the pharmacy. Each accusation was a lie, but James realized the trap. In a small town where everyone knew everyone, a black family would stand out. Any sighting, real or imagined, could be twisted into suspicious behavior. We haven't been to any of those places, James said quietly. We drove straight here from the highway. Hutchinson straightened up, his hand moving to rest on his nightstick. You calling me a liar, boy? The racial epithet sent a chill through the restaurant. An elderly man at the counter shifted uncomfortably. A woman with 2 young children quickly gathered her purse and headed for the exit. Tyler's bottom lip began to tremble. At 8 years old, he didn't understand the words being spoken, but he could feel the hatred radiating from the uniformed man looming over their table. Please, Sarah said, her teacher's voice steady but strained. We don't want any trouble. We'll pay for our food and leave. Oh, you'll leave when I say you can leave, Hutchinson snapped. Right now, I need to see some identification. All of you. James reached slowly for his wallet, his movements careful and deliberate. 20 years of being a black man in America had taught him that sudden movements around agitated police officers could be deadly. But Hutchinson wasn't satisfied with compliance. He wanted humiliation. Actually, let me see your hands first, the officer barked. Put them flat on the table where I can see them. The command was designed to make James look like a criminal in front of his children. Every patron in the diner could see a black man being treated as a threat while trying to buy his family lunch. Maya's eyes filled with tears as she watched her father comply with the degrading order. Daddy, why is he being mean to us? Because some people think they can go anywhere they want, Hutchinson said, directing his words at the 12-year-old girl. Some people think the rules don't apply to them. James felt something dangerous stir in his chest. Not fear, but fury. This wasn't just about him anymore. This corrupt officer was terrorizing his children, teaching them that their father could be humiliated, and there was nothing anyone would do to stop it. Officer, please, James said, his military training warring with his parental instincts. Whatever you think we've done, there are children present. Hutchinson leaned closer, his face inches from James's ear. His voice dropped to a whisper that carried the weight of every racist threat ever spoken. I don't think you understand the situation here, boy. This is my town. I decide who gets to feel comfortable here. I decide who belongs and who needs to move along, and right now, I'm deciding that you and your family are causing a disturbance. The psychological warfare was expertly applied. Hutchinson knew exactly how to escalate tension without crossing lines that would bring internal affairs breathing down his neck. He was a predator who had perfected his craft over 15 years of terrorizing people who couldn't fight back. James looked around the diner at the faces watching this confrontation unfold. Some customers looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Others seemed to approve of the officer's actions. A few had already left, unwilling to witness what might happen next. His children sat frozen in terror, watching their father being systematically humiliated by a man with a badge and a gun. This was the lesson Hutchinson wanted to teach them, that in his world, their father's dignity meant nothing. But James Richardson wasn't just any father, and Officer Bradley Hutchinson had no idea who he was dealing with. The confrontation was about to escalate in ways neither man could have imagined. Hutchinson stepped back from the table, his hand moving to his radio with theatrical precision. The static crackled through the tense silence as he keyed the microphone, speaking loud enough for every customer to hear his next move. Dispatch, Unit 47 requesting backup at Miller's Diner. Got a Code 2 situation with some out-of-town subjects who may be carrying contraband. The lie rolled off his tongue with practiced ease. James felt his jaw clench as the false report went out over police channels. Within minutes, other officers would arrive, turning this harassment into a full-scale incident. "Officer, that's not necessary," James said, his voice carefully controlled. "We're cooperating fully." "Are you?" Hutchinson's eyebrows raised in mock surprise. "Because I'm detecting the distinct odor of marijuana coming from your direction. Smells like it might be coming from your vehicle." Sarah's sharp intake of breath was audible across the booth. The accusation was completely fabricated. None of them had ever used drugs. But they all understood its implications. In this small town, with this officer's word against theirs, the truth might not matter. Tyler began crying softly, confused by the grown-up words but terrified by the angry man in uniform. Maya wrapped her arm around her little brother, trying to comfort him while fighting back her own tears. "There are no drugs in our car," James stated firmly. "You're welcome to verify that through proper channels." Hutchinson's laugh was harsh and ugly. "Proper channels? Son, I am the proper channel in this town." He leaned down again, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Now you can make this easy on your family, or you can make it very, very difficult. Your choice." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Around them, the diner had fallen completely silent except for the soft crying of James's children and the mechanical hum of the refrigeration units behind the counter. Betty, the waitress, approached hesitantly, her hands wringing a dish rag. "Officer Hutchinson, maybe we could—" "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back." Hutchinson cut her off without looking away from James. "This is police business now." Through the window, James could see a second patrol car pulling into the parking lot, its lights flashing, but sirens silent. Officer Tommy Walsh emerged from the vehicle, a younger man in his 20s who looked uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge his superior. "Looks like my partner's here," Hutchinson said with satisfaction. "Tommy's good with vehicle searches, real thorough." The implication was crystal clear. Whether they found anything or not, the Richardson family was about to be publicly humiliated in front of an entire restaurant full of witnesses. "Stand up," Hutchinson ordered. "We're taking this outside." James hesitated, every instinct screaming against leaving the relative safety of the public restaurant. But with his children terrified and a second officer now involved, he had no choice but to comply. The family slid out of the booth, Sarah gathering Maya and Tyler close to her sides. As they walked toward the door, James could feel every eye in the restaurant following them. Some faces showed sympathy, others curiosity. A few displayed the satisfied smirk of people enjoying someone else's misfortune. The afternoon sun felt harsh after the diner's dim interior. Officer Walsh stood by their SUV, his younger face troubled but his silence complicated. He nodded nervously as Hutchinson approached. "Tommy, we got reports of drug activity involving this vehicle," Hutchinson announced, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "I'm going to need you to conduct a thorough search while I detain the subjects." Walsh's eyes flickered with uncertainty. "Did you get consent for the search, Brad?" "Don't need consent when there's probable cause," Hutchinson replied smoothly. "I detected the odor of controlled substances. That's all the justification we need." It was a lie, and all three adults knew it. But Walsh was young, inexperienced, and unwilling to challenge a 15-year veteran in front of civilians. "Dad, I'm scared," Tyler whispered, clinging to his father's leg. James knelt down to his son's level, his voice gentle despite the circumstances. "It's going to be okay, buddy. The officers just need to check our car and then we'll go home." "Touching," Hutchinson sneered. "Real father-son moment. Too bad Daddy's about to learn what happens when people lie to police officers." He moved to the SUV's rear door, popping it open without permission. The family's belongings were neatly organized: suitcases, soccer equipment, Sarah's teaching materials in a canvas bag. Hutchinson began pulling items out carelessly, dumping clothes onto the asphalt parking lot. Sarah's carefully folded dresses landed in a heap next to Tyler's clean school shirts. Maya's books scattered across the ground, pages fluttering in the afternoon breeze. "This is unnecessary," James said, watching his family's possessions be treated like garbage. "If you're looking for something specific." "Shut up," Hutchinson barked. "I'll tell you when you can talk." He continued his destructive search, tossing items with increasing aggression. A container of Sarah's homemade cookies shattered against the pavement. Tyler's favorite stuffed animal landed in a puddle of motor oil. Walsh shifted uncomfortably, clearly troubled by his partner's methods but too intimidated to intervene. "Brad, maybe you should do your job and help me search this vehicle," Hutchinson cut him off. "Unless you got a problem with proper police work." The younger officer fell silent, cowed by the implicit threat to his career. In small-town police departments, challenging a senior officer could mean the end of everything. From inside the diner, faces pressed against windows to watch the spectacle. Some customers had come outside, forming a loose semicircle of gawkers. James recognized the look on their faces, the same morbid curiosity that drew crowds to car accidents and house fires. A third patrol car pulled into the lot, and Sergeant Mike Coleman stepped out. At 52, Coleman had 25 years on the force and a reputation for looking the other way when his officers bent the rules. His presence meant this situation was about to get much worse. "What we got here, Hutch?" Coleman asked, surveying the scene with practiced indifference. "Suspected drug dealers from out of town," Hutchinson replied without missing a beat. "Probably running products between cities. Got 2 kids with them. Might be using them as cover." The lies were escalating now, each accusation more serious than the last. James felt the trap closing around his family as 3 armed officers positioned themselves strategically around the parking lot. Sarah pulled her children closer, her teacher's instincts recognizing the signs of a situation spiraling completely out of control. Maya was trying to be brave for her little brother, but tears streaked down both their faces. "Please," Sarah said, her voice breaking slightly. "Our children are scared. Whatever you think we've done—" "Lady, the best thing you can do right now is keep quiet and let us finish our investigation," Coleman said dismissively. "Unless you got something to hide." Hutchinson had reached the back of the cargo area now, where James's military duffel bag sat among the sports equipment. He pulled it out roughly, the heavy canvas bag hitting the asphalt with a dull thud. "What's in here?" he demanded, already unzipping the bag before James could answer. Military-issue workout gear spilled out. PT shorts, compression shirts, tactical boots. Then Hutchinson's hands found something that should have given him pause. A carefully folded American flag in a triangular presentation case, the kind given to honor military service. Instead of recognizing what it represented, Hutchinson held it up mockingly. "What's this supposed to be? You buy this at some army surplus store? Trying to play soldier now?" The disrespect toward the flag, toward everything it represented, sent a shock of rage through James that nearly broke his carefully maintained control. That flag had been presented to him by his commanding officer after a particularly dangerous mission in Afghanistan. It represented the blood of fallen teammates, the sacrifice of military families, the honor of serving something greater than himself. Tyler saw his father's expression and started crying harder. "Daddy, make him stop!" But James couldn't make him stop. Despite 20 years of training to be the most dangerous man in any room, despite leading special operations missions against the world's most violent enemies, he was powerless to protect his family from this uniformed predator. Hutchinson tossed the flag carelessly back onto the pile of scattered belongings, grinding it under his boot as he continued his search. The symbolic desecration was deliberate, designed to provoke James into doing something that would justify escalating to violence. "Nothing but junk," Hutchinson announced to his fellow officers. "But I got a feeling there's more to this story. Maybe we need to take a closer look at these people." The threat was unmistakable. In the space of 30 minutes, a simple family lunch had become a nightmare that could end with arrests, separation, and trauma that would haunt his children for years. James Richardson had faced down armed terrorists and survived firefights in hostile territory. But standing in that parking lot, watching his family's dignity be systematically destroyed by a corrupt police officer, he had never felt more helpless in his life. Hutchinson straightened up from the scattered belongings, brushing dust off his hands with theatrical satisfaction. The search had yielded nothing, no drugs, no weapons, no contraband of any kind, but he wasn't finished with his performance. "Well, well," he said, loud enough for the growing crowd of onlookers to hear. "Looks like we got ourselves some real smart criminals here. Know how to hide their product real good." James felt his hands clench into fists at his sides. 20 years of military discipline warred against every paternal instinct screaming at him to protect his family. His children cowered behind Sarah, their clothes stained with tears and parking lot grime. "Officer, you've searched our vehicle thoroughly," James said, his voice steady despite the rage burning in his chest. "You found nothing because there's nothing to find. We'd like to collect our belongings and leave." Hutchinson's laugh was cruel and sharp. "Oh, you'd like to leave. That's really convenient. But see, I still have some questions about what you people were really doing in my town." He stepped closer to James, invading his personal space with the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. The smell of stale coffee and cheap cologne mixed with something else, the sour stench of a bully drunk on power. "Matter of fact," Hutchinson continued, "I think we need to take this down to the station. Let the detective have a real conversation with you folks. Maybe separate you and your wife. See if your stories match up." The threat of separation sent Sarah's protective instincts into overdrive. "You can't separate us from our children. We haven't done anything wrong." "Ma'am, I can do whatever I need to do to ensure public safety," Sergeant Coleman interjected, his tone suggesting this was a routine procedure rather than harassment. Tyler was crying openly now, clinging to his mother's legs. Maya tried to comfort him while fighting back her own tears. "Mommy, I want to go home," she whispered. Hutchinson seemed to feed off their distress, his cruel smile widening. "Home's gonna have to wait, little girl. Your daddy's got some explaining to do first." That's when James made his decision. He'd endured the insults, the illegal search, the public humiliation. But watching this corrupt officer terrorize his children had pushed him past the point of silent compliance. He reached slowly for his wallet, his movements deliberate and careful. All three officers tensed, hands moving instinctively toward their weapons. "I'm just getting my identification," James said calmly, "since you asked for it." "About time," Hutchinson sneered. "Let's see what kind of fake ID you got in there." James opened his wallet with practiced precision. Past his driver's license, past his credit cards, past the family photos, to the identification he'd never intended to reveal during what was supposed to be a simple family lunch. He pulled out two items simultaneously: his military identification card and his commander's badge. The afternoon sunlight caught the official seals and metallic surfaces, making them gleam like beacons of authority. "Commander James Richardson," he said quietly, his voice carrying a new weight of command. "United States Navy SEALs, Naval Special Warfare Command, SEAL Team 7. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Hutchinson's face went white as copy paper. His hands began to shake as the full implications crashed over him like a tidal wave. The man he'd been terrorizing wasn't just any civilian. He was one of America's most elite warriors, a Navy SEAL commander. A man who'd probably killed more enemies in service to his country than Hutchinson had arrested petty criminals. Officer Walsh took an involuntary step backward, his young face flushing with embarrassment. Sergeant Coleman's jaw dropped open, his 25 years of experience telling him they'd just stepped in something that could end all their careers. James straightened to his full height, and suddenly everything about him changed. The quiet family man transformed into the commanding officer he truly was. His posture radiated authority earned through 2 decades of leading men into the most dangerous situations on Earth. "Officer Hutchinson," James said, his voice now carrying the unmistakable tone of command, "you have violated the civil rights of my family under color of law. You have conducted an illegal search without probable cause or consent. You have detained us without charges for over an hour. Each of these actions constitutes a federal crime. The parking lot fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic on the highway. Every witness to the confrontation suddenly understood they were watching a complete reversal of power. Sarah pulled out her phone, no longer cowering but standing tall beside her husband. "I've been recording this entire encounter," she announced clearly. "Every word, every action, every violation of our constitutional rights." Maya, emboldened by her parents' transformation, stepped forward with her chin raised. "I memorized all their badge numbers," she declared with the precision of her father's training. 47, 23, and 18. Hutchinson looked around desperately at his fellow officers, searching for support that was no longer there. Walsh had backed away completely, clearly wanting no part of the disaster his senior partner had created. Coleman stood frozen, calculating the career damage already spreading like wildfire through the department's chain of command. "Commander, sir," Hutchinson stammered, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "I had no idea. If you had just identified yourself from the beginning." James's eyes were steel and ice. "I shouldn't have to prove my worth to be treated with basic human dignity, officer. Neither should my wife. Neither should my children." The predator had become prey. The hunter was now hunted, and everyone in that parking lot knew that Officer Bradley Hutchinson's reign of terror had just come to an end. The silence in the parking lot stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Hutchinson's face cycled through shades of panic, from pale white to sickly green to flushed red as the magnitude of his catastrophic mistake sank in. "Commander Richardson, sir," he stammered, suddenly remembering military courtesy he'd learned during his brief Army Reserve stint 15 years ago. "I deeply apologize for this misunderstanding. If I had known about your service—" "Stop." James's voice cut through the air like a blade. "There is no misunderstanding here, officer. You targeted my family because of the color of our skin. You fabricated probable cause. You terrorized my children. Your apology is meaningless." Hutchinson's hands shook as he bent down, frantically trying to gather the scattered belongings he'd thrown carelessly across the asphalt. Sarah's dresses were stained with motor oil. Tyler's stuffed animal was covered in dirt. The presented American flag bore scuff marks from his boot. "Please let me help clean this up," Hutchinson pleaded, his earlier swagger completely evaporating. "I can explain everything to my supervisor. This was all just standard procedure." "Standard procedure?" Sarah's voice carried the sharp edge of an elementary teacher who'd caught a student in a lie. "Is it standard procedure to call someone boy? To threaten to separate children from their parents?" Officer Walsh stepped forward nervously, his young face flushed with embarrassment. "Commander, sir, I want you to know I was uncomfortable with everything that happened here. I should have spoken up." "Yes, you should have," James replied without breaking eye contact with Hutchinson. "Your silence made you complicit in every violation that occurred." Sergeant Coleman finally found his voice, though it cracked with the weight of impending disaster. "Commander Richardson, perhaps we can handle this internally. Department discipline, some retraining programs." James turned his commanding gaze on the sergeant. "Internal discipline? Your officer just committed multiple federal crimes in front of dozens of witnesses. This goes far beyond department discipline." Maya stepped closer to her father, her 12-year-old voice clear and strong. "Daddy, are you going to make sure he can't hurt other families?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Every witness in the parking lot, the diner customers, the passing motorists, the officers themselves, waited for the answer. "Yes, sweetheart," James said, his voice softening for his daughter but losing none of its authority. "We're going to make sure this never happens to anyone else." Hutchinson dropped to his knees beside the scattered belongings, his desperation palpable. "Please, Commander, I have a family too. A wife and 2 kids. I made a mistake, but I can't lose my job. I can't lose my pension." "You should have thought about your family before you terrorized mine," James replied coldly. You should have considered your pension before you violated your oath to serve and protect. Within minutes, the parking lot began filling with vehicles. Chief of Police Robert Martinez arrived first, his face grim as he surveyed the scene. Behind him came Captain Lisa Thompson from Internal Affairs, her notebook already out and recording everything. "Chief Martinez," James addressed the senior officer with military formality. "I am Commander James Richardson, U.S. Navy SEALs. Your officer has committed civil rights violations that require immediate federal investigation." Chief Martinez looked from Hutchinson's panicked face to the scattered belongings to the terrified children still clinging to their mother. The optics were devastating. A decorated Navy SEAL commander and his family publicly humiliated by racist police officers. "Officer Hutchinson, you are suspended immediately pending a full investigation," Martinez announced. "Badges and weapons now." Hutchinson's hands trembled as he unclipped his badge and holstered his service pistol. 15 years of carrying those symbols of authority stripped away in seconds. Other officers who'd arrived turned away, unwilling to witness his professional execution. "Commander Richardson," Chief Martinez continued, "I offer the department's sincerest apologies. This behavior does not represent our values or training standards." "Your apologies don't erase the trauma inflicted on my children," James replied. "They don't undo the violation of our constitutional rights. Words are insufficient, Chief. We need action." Tyler tugged on his father's shirt, his 8-year-old voice barely above a whisper. "Daddy, is the scary policeman going to jail?" James knelt down to his son's level, his voice gentle but certain. "Justice has many forms, buddy. But yes, there will be consequences for what happened here today." Betty the waitress approached hesitantly from the diner, carrying a box of the family's uneaten food. "No charge for your meal," she said quietly. "I'm sorry nobody spoke up sooner. We should have done something." "Yes," James said simply. "You should have." The crowd began to disperse, but the damage was irreversible. Within hours, this incident would be documented, investigated, and broadcast across multiple media platforms. Officer Bradley Hutchinson's career was over. But for the Richardson family, the real work of seeking justice was just beginning. Within 48 hours, the Richardson family's ordeal transformed from a local incident into a national crisis. The cell phone videos captured by witnesses had gone viral across social media platforms, accumulating millions of views and sparking outrage from coast to coast. FBI Special Agent Maria Santos arrived at the Richardson home in San Diego on Tuesday morning, her credentials and stern expression making clear this was no routine visit. At 38, Santos had prosecuted dozens of civil rights cases and recognized the federal significance immediately. "Commander Richardson," she said, settling into their living room while Tyler colored quietly nearby, "the Civil Rights Division is opening a full investigation under Title 18, Section 242. We have probable cause for federal charges." Sarah sat beside her husband, still processing the trauma of watching her children learn that police officers could terrorize innocent families. "Agent Santos, we want justice, but we also want to make sure this never happens to another family." The investigation moved with unusual speed. Within a week, FBI forensic specialists had recovered additional security footage from businesses along Highway 34. The evidence was overwhelming. Hutchinson's radio transmissions revealed premeditated racial bias. His false reports to dispatch constituted criminal fraud, and his actions met every legal definition of civil rights violations. Meanwhile, investigative journalists began exposing Hutchinson's history. The Millbrook Gazette published a devastating expose revealing 23 previous complaints against the officer, all dismissed by department leadership without proper investigation. Reporter Jennifer Walsh uncovered social media posts connecting Hutchinson to local white supremacist groups. "This pattern of behavior goes back over a decade," Walsh reported on the evening news. "Internal affairs files show consistent complaints from minority citizens, but Officer Hutchinson was repeatedly protected by what sources describe as an old boys network within the department. The story gained national traction when CNN featured it during prime time. Anderson Cooper interviewed James via satellite from Naval Base Coronado, the commander's dress blues and military decorations providing stark contrast to the civilian clothes he'd worn during the diner incident. "Commander Richardson, you've served this country with distinction for 20 years, Cooper said. How did it feel to be treated like a criminal in front of your children? James's response was measured but powerful. Anderson, I've led missions against enemies of America in some of the most dangerous places on Earth, but I've never felt more helpless than watching my 8-year-old son learn that his father could be humiliated simply for being black. The interview segment, viewed by 8 million people, sparked nationwide discussions about military families facing discrimination. Veterans organizations across the country issued statements supporting the Richardson family and demanding police reform. Social media exploded with the hashtag #RespectTheService. Military spouses shared similar experiences of discrimination. Active duty personnel posted photos in uniform with signs reading, "We serve all Americans." The Navy SEAL community, typically silent about internal matters, issued an unprecedented statement condemning the treatment of their commander. Federal prosecutors moved aggressively. U.S. Attorney Patricia Williams announced charges against Hutchinson during a packed press conference in the federal courthouse downtown. The indictment included deprivation of civil rights under color of law, conspiracy to violate civil rights, false imprisonment, and obstruction of justice. Officer Hutchinson's badge was meant to protect and serve, Williams declared to assembled reporters. Instead, he weaponized his authority to terrorize an American hero and his family. This prosecution sends a clear message that civil rights violations will face federal consequences. The trial began 3 months later in a packed courtroom. Federal Judge Patricia Rodriguez presided over proceedings that captured national attention. Hutchinson's defense attorney, struggling with overwhelming evidence, attempted multiple strategies that backfired spectacularly. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," defense counsel argued desperately, "my client was following standard police procedures. He had reasonable suspicion." The prosecution's response was devastating. Video evidence showed Hutchinson's racial bias clearly. Expert witnesses testified about proper police procedures, demonstrating how every action violated constitutional protections. When James took the witness stand, the courtroom fell silent. Wearing his dress blue uniform with ribbons representing Bronze Star, Purple Heart, and Navy Cross decorations, he recounted the incident with military precision. "My children watched their father, a man who has served this country with honor, being treated like a criminal," James testified, his voice steady but emotional. "My daughter asked me why the policeman was being mean to us. How do you explain systematic racism to a 12-year-old who believes in justice and fairness?" The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman's voice rang clearly through the courtroom. "Guilty on all counts." Judge Rodriguez's sentencing hearing 2 weeks later drew packed crowds. Victim impact statements from the Richardson family moved spectators to tears. Maya, now 13, read a letter she'd written about the incident. "I used to believe police officers were heroes who protected families," she read, her young voice strong and clear. "Officer Hutchinson taught me that some people abuse their power to hurt innocent people. But he also taught me that standing up for what's right is more important than staying quiet." Judge Rodriguez delivered a scathing rebuke before pronouncing sentence. "Officer Hutchinson, you violated your oath, betrayed public trust, and traumatized children whose only crime was being black in America. Your actions represent everything wrong with policing in our nation." The sentence was severe. 18 months in federal prison, permanent law enforcement ban, $75,000 in fines, and 200 hours of community service with civil rights organizations. But the Richardson family's pursuit of justice extended beyond criminal prosecution. Their civil lawsuit against Hutchinson, the Millbrook Police Department, and the city resulted in a $2.3 million settlement that funded comprehensive police reforms. The consent decree required federal oversight of the department for 5 years. New policies mandated body cameras with audio recording, civilian oversight boards, and mandatory bias training for all officers. The settlement also established a scholarship fund for children affected by police misconduct. Millbrook Police Chief Martinez, facing federal investigation into the department's history of covering up complaints, announced his resignation. The new chief, brought in from outside the community, began implementing reforms designed to rebuild public trust. Officer Walsh, the young policeman who'd remained silent during the incident, testified for the prosecution in exchange for avoiding federal charges. He was suspended for 6 months and required to complete extensive retraining before returning to duty. Sergeant Coleman, whose 25-year career included multiple instances of looking the other way during misconduct, was forced into early retirement and lost his pension benefits. The case became a landmark precedent for federal civil rights prosecutions. Legal scholars noted its significance in establishing consequences for police officers who abuse their authority against military families. James Richardson returned to his duties with SEAL Team 7, but the incident had changed him profoundly. He began speaking at military bases about discrimination, helping other service members understand their rights and resources. "Justice delayed is justice denied," he often told audiences of fellow warriors. But justice served sends a message that no one, regardless of their uniform or authority, is above the law. The message was clear. Officer Bradley Hutchinson's reign of terror was over, but the fight for equal justice under law continued across America. 6 months after the federal courthouse doors closed on Officer Bradley Hutchinson's sentencing, the morning sun filtered through the windows of Naval Base Coronado as Commander James Richardson adjusted his dress blue uniform. Today marked his promotion ceremony to captain, a milestone that should have been purely celebratory. Instead, as he pinned his new rank insignia to his collar, James reflected on how that Sunday afternoon at Miller's Diner had transformed not just his family, but sparked a national conversation about justice and accountability. The Richardson children had returned to their normal routines, but they were forever changed. Maya, now 13, had become a passionate advocate for civil rights in her middle school. Her essay titled, "The Day My Dad Became a Hero Twice," won the statewide youth writing competition and was read aloud at the school board meeting. "My father served our country for 20 years overseas," Maya had written. But his biggest battle for freedom happened in a diner parking lot in front of his own children. Tyler, still drawing military vehicles with the precision his father had taught him, now included diverse faces in his artwork. His latest creation showed police officers and Navy SEALs working together to protect families of all colors. When asked about it, the 9-year-old simply said, "Good guys help good guys, no matter what they look like." Sarah had channeled her experience into advocacy work with military spouse organizations. She testified before Congress about the unique challenges faced by service families, helping pass legislation that provided additional civil rights protections for military personnel and their dependents. "Military families sacrifice enough for this country," she told lawmakers during emotional testimony. "They shouldn't have to sacrifice their dignity or their children's sense of safety because of the color of their skin." The broader impact rippled far beyond one family's trauma. The Millbrook Police Department, under federal oversight, had become a model for community policing reform. Crime rates remained stable, while complaints against officers dropped by 70%. The Civilian Oversight Board, established as part of the settlement, gave residents a voice in holding police accountable. Former Officer Bradley Hutchinson served 14 months in federal prison before his release on supervised probation. During his incarceration, mandatory counseling sessions forced him to confront the racist beliefs that had driven his behavior. Upon release, his court-ordered community service with the NAACP provided a harsh education about the real impact of police bias. In a surprising development, Hutchinson had requested to meet with the Richardson family during his final month of community service. The meeting, held at the Civil Rights Organization's offices, was tense but transformative. "Commander Richardson," Hutchinson said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I destroyed your children's innocence because of my own hatred. I terrorized your family because I thought my badge made me untouchable. There's no excuse for what I did. But I want you to know that your courage in pursuing justice forced me to see the monster I had become." James studied the broken man before him, the same person who had once wielded authority like a weapon, now stripped of power and forced to confront his victims. "Mr. Hutchinson, accountability isn't just about punishment. It's about preventing future victims. If your experience helps one police officer think twice before abusing their authority, then something positive came from our family's pain." The meeting ended without forgiveness, but with understanding. Hutchinson would spend the rest of his life carrying the weight of his actions, while the Richardson family continued their mission of ensuring no other family endured similar trauma. Standing now in his captain's uniform, James thought about the letter he'd received that morning from a young Black Navy recruit in Virginia. The sailor wrote about facing discrimination from local police near his base, but finding the courage to file complaints because of the Richardson family's example. "Your story taught me that serving my country doesn't mean accepting injustice," the sailor had written. "It means fighting for the principles we've sworn to defend even when that fight happens at home." These stories arrived weekly, from military families, from civilian victims of police misconduct, from young people inspired to pursue careers in civil rights law. Each letter reinforced that their ordeal at Miller's Diner had catalyzed something larger than personal justice. The promotion ceremony concluded with James addressing the assembled naval personnel. His words carried the authority of rank, but also the wisdom earned through personal struggle. "We serve to protect the Constitution and the ideals it represents," he told the crowd. "But those ideals mean nothing if we don't defend them in our own communities, for our own families, and for our fellow citizens who may not wear uniforms but deserve the same respect we've earned through service." After the ceremony, as his family celebrated at their favorite restaurant near the base, Tyler looked up from his drawing and asked, "Daddy, do you think that mean policeman learned to be nice now?" James considered the question carefully before answering. "Son, some people can change when they face consequences for their actions. Others can't. But what matters most is that good people, like your mom, like your sister, like the people who supported us, never stop fighting to make sure everyone gets treated fairly." Maya nodded seriously. "That's why we shared our story, right? So other kids won't have to be scared like we were?" "Exactly, sweetheart. Sometimes the hardest thing we can do is tell the truth about what happened to us, but that truth can protect other families from experiencing the same pain." The Richardson family's journey from victims to advocates illustrated a fundamental truth about American justice. It requires constant vigilance from ordinary citizens willing to stand up against abuse of power. If this story moved you, if it made you think about your own experiences with injustice or discrimination, don't let it end here. Share this video to raise awareness about the ongoing need for police accountability. Subscribe to join a community that believes in equal treatment under law, regardless of race, religion, or background.
The story you heard today wasn't cleaned up. It was told exactly as it happened. At Black Voices Uncut, we believe that's the only way truth can live. If you felt something, hit like, comment, and your reaction, and subscribe. Every week, we bring you voices that refuse to be silenced.